Uh-oh, I made a gray box pop up. Okay, there we go. All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation on America's Red Rock Wilderness, Fighting Climate Change and Saving Wild Utah. For those who don't know me, I am Amanda Shepard, Director of the Sierra Club Hoosier chapter. Before we start, I want to thank the Wildlands group so much for hosting tonight's event and encouraging us to put this on with SUWA. A couple of logistical items before we dive in. Please remember that you can chat questions and comments. So if you aren't super familiar with Zoom, you go to the bottom of your screen and hover over there. There's a chat button. You can click on that, put in questions or anything that you have there. You can also react along the same line on the bottom there. There are reactions. So if you want to clap, if you want to put a thumbs up, if you want a heart or whatever, you can do that and interact that way. While Clayton is doing his presentation, he can actually not see any of us, unfortunately. So he will answer questions and comments either at the end of the presentation or if he asks for participation, then I can relay some of those questions on to him. The other thing I would know is please be sure that you are muted when you are not speaking. So that way we can all hear Clayton's fantastic presentation. So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's presenter, Clayton. I'm going to mess this up. Is it Daughenbaugh?
Daughenbaugh.
Daughenbaugh. Okay. All right. I should have asked that before we started. I am so sorry.
All right.
So Clayton, Clayton Daughenbaugh is the organizing director and Midwest regional organizer for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. He's a longtime Sierra Club volunteer, currently serving as vice chair of the National Wildlands and Wilderness Grassroots Network team, and is a recipient of the William Colby Award, the club's top recognition for volunteer leadership. The Red Rock country of Southern Utah is among the most spectacular landscapes in the world. It's also the largest network of unprotected wilderness remaining in the lower 48 states. I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to Clayton, and just thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Clayton, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have to say it is pretty weird sitting here not being able to see anybody, but I guess y'all can see me and each other, and so that's cool. And maybe when we get to the end and do some questions, I can stop sharing the screen and then actually see everyone who's here. So that'll be good. I'll be looking forward to that. But in the meantime, we'll move on through this. I wanted to say some special appreciation for George and his work and others in the Duneland group in recent contacts with Representative Mervan's office, which have, as we'll talk about briefly a little later on, have yet to come to complete fruition, but we've got our foot in the door. And Jesse and others down by Indianapolis have helped out with Representative Carson. And I've been down to Columbus as well in times past with this, and just want to appreciate all of you for the support that has been forthcoming so far, and looking forward to continuing that. Even though I'm here to talk about Utah, for folks in Indiana, I'm actually in Illinois, which means I'm not unacquainted with Indiana. I've spent my share of time swimming in Lake Michigan off the Indiana dunes. I've been to nearly 20 Indy 500s. My family, when I was young, we went hiking and spent some time in the lodge at Turkey Run. I've been to concerts in Terre Haute and Lafayette. You kind of get the idea. So I'm a next door neighbor and always kind of comfortable with Indiana. So I just really appreciate the chance to talk here this evening. Also, I want to say that this program evolves all the time, and it's evolving here now to try and give it a greater context in relation to climate change and larger things beyond just the wilderness lands. I shouldn't say just, but so I'm interested if anybody after the fact wants to email me some suggestions or feedback. I am all ears regarding that as well. So please, in addition to enjoying and learning and asking some questions and interacting, if y'all want to do that, that would be wonderful as well. So I want to start, just kind of give an overview of how this effort is structured and goes forward by using this picture here as a way of introducing key elements of the protection effort for these lands in Utah. I guess the first thing to introduce is, of course, the Red Rock landscape. This is what this is all about. This picture is taken inside Bears Ears National Monument a couple of years ago. The gentleman on the right underneath the hat there is Wayne Hoskisson. Wayne is the wilderness lead person for the Utah chapter of the Sierra Club. He also has recently joined SUA's board of directors. Wayne lives in a small apartment in Moab, Utah, down by Arches National Park. He has been involved in this effort since the earliest stages. He was one of the folks who was instrumental. There were actually hundreds of people, but Wayne was among the more instrumental in the initial citizens inventory done almost entirely by volunteers that first determined what lands were eligible for wilderness protection inside the state of Utah. So Wayne is a hero. You got a set of heroes here in this picture. And Wayne here is representing the role of the Sierra Club in this effort. I got involved through a Sierra Club activist outing back in 1995. Wayne was already a veteran at that point. And the Sierra Club is one of the three organizations on the Utah Wilderness Coalition, which is an entity of about 100 groups, steering committee of three groups, Sierra Club, SUA, and the Natural Resources Defense Council. And so the person next to Wayne there on the left is Scott Groney. He is the executive director of Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. I'm not quite as old as Wayne, but he's been in this probably just as long, almost as long. Another hero of this effort. And I'll use Scott's presence to say a couple words about SUA. We are a nonprofit organization, obviously based in Utah. We have about a little under 15,000 members. Around half of them reside inside the state of Utah, and the other half are scattered across the 49 states of the country. We have 4 offices. We have a headquarters in Salt Lake City. We have an office down in Moab, which is where Scott works out of. We have an office in Washington, D.C. We have my attic in Berwyn, just outside of Chicago. In fact, I'm assuming y'all can see me, so you can also see a little bit of the attic. You can see it's not the most scenic of the offices. So if you're going to come for a visit, I'd pick one of the other 3, even though Berwyn's a little closer by, then you're welcome to come see the attic. We have a couple dozen staff. We have a half dozen organizers, such as myself, inside Utah and scattered around the country. We have lawyers, about a half dozen lawyers. We have media specialists. We, of course, have an administration team. We have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. And we have one group of folks that is particularly critical to this effort that are worth highlighting. We call them our Wildlands team. And they have the job that is the job to kill for, because it's their job to hike. They go out on the landscape and they are the experts. They know what the condition of the land is. They know what the threats are. They know what the impacts are. They are the ones who are our eyes and ears on the ground, so that we know better what the condition of these lands are in the wilderness proposal, even than the Bureau of Land Management, which is the federal land management agency that has the oversight responsibility for these public lands, for which we all, people in the United States, are the owners of. So that is SUA. We are member supported. About 90% of our budget comes from member donations of various sizes. So we can call things as we see them pretty much, and we tend to do that. The person to the left of Scott there is Mark Maraboy. If there was one person who could be said to be the father of Bears Ears National Monument, it would be Mark. Of course, there is not one person who could make that claim, but Mark has been central to the development of the Bears Ears National Monument in southeastern Utah. He's a past member of the Navajo Nation Tribal Council. He was the first Native American elected to a county commission, San Juan County, down where in the southeast corner of the state where Bears Ears is, many, many years ago. He's got a long and storied history of activism, both in the Navajo Nation and on land protection efforts, and spent a good deal of time on SUA's board of directors too, but he recently termed off and is now an emeritus of SUA's board. And you'll see more of Mark later when we get to the film, the video portion of tonight's presentation. But speaking of heroes, Mark is definitely one of those. And then to the left of Mark is Senator Richard Durbin from Illinois, who is the lead sponsor of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act in the Senate, has been since we persuaded him to do that back in 1997. And there's an Indiana hook to why Senator Durbin has done this. He considered Senator Paul Douglas one of his mentors. And Senator Douglas, as some of you may be aware, was instrumental in getting the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore established way back in the day. Senator Durbin was aware of that and realized that though he's a senator from Illinois, he is also a United States senator. And so he has demonstrated that commitment by stepping up on behalf of these lands in Utah. And in fact, on conservation matters in general in the United States Congress, he is one of the leading voices, both out front and behind the scenes, for protection efforts. So these are four heroes, but everybody who participates is a hero. And so I'm going to get down to brass tacks here right away and give you the opportunity, if you haven't availed yourself of it recently, to sign up and send a message to your members of Congress. If you text ARRWA for America's Red Rock Wilderness Act to 52886, you can do it right now while we talk on your phone, or write it down and do it after the fact. You'll have to fill out a quick form or two, but it will enable you to send a message to your members of Congress. If you're in Congressman Carson's district, you can say thank you. Otherwise, you'll be asking for support. There'll be a couple other opportunities for folks to help out here this evening, but this is the first of them. And as I say, I might as well get down to brass tacks right at the start, because we're all about trying to get these places protected. I want to take a couple minutes to say a few words about why it is that I've got involved in and stayed involved in this effort, first as a volunteer beginning back in 1995, and now fortunately paid to do that. Any of you who are SUA members, thank you very much. You helped put my kids through college. But this picture, I think, represents why it is I first got started in this effort. It is pretty spectacular. This is a Natural Bridges National Monument. If you are in southeast Utah on a clear summer night with no moon out, well, this really doesn't even do it justice. It is humbling to be outdoors in this kind of place, because it is a reminder of how small and insignificant we are in the bigger scheme of things. It's to me, it's a spiritual experience. To me, it's like looking at God. And I've raised my kids that to hike is to pray. And this picture really kind of represents why I think that's the case. But not only is it humbling, it's also ennobling, because I'm a part of this and we're all a part of this, and it's truly spectacular. And so that was the thing that, of course, first drew me in. But then I got another reason. As time went along, here's my two sons. Many years ago, we got Luke on the right and Sam on the left. And of course, I want to save these places so that they'll be around for Luke and Sam to enjoy long past I'm gone, and for their kids and their kids' kids to enjoy. And these are reasons why all of us are active in trying to protect the places, the natural places that that are special to us, that we enjoy, and that even when we can't go, the places that we know that are deserving of these kind of protection. And these, of course, remain very valid reasons. But in recent years, I've been learning that there's an even bigger reason why this is important. And this picture represents that. Speaking of reminding us how small and insignificant we are, can you see any of us down there? I don't think so. What this picture tells us is that, well, when we work to try and protect natural places, special places, we have a tendency as human beings to think, we're kind of doing these places a favor. We're saving the ones that are still around, that that our species hasn't decided to use up yet. And it's like giving the homeless guy $10 outside the grocery store. It's a kind of charity that we invest ourselves in. And that's well worth doing. It's an important thing to do, but it doesn't reflect the reality. The reality is that the universe is wild. The universe operates on its own means, by its own standards. It's the universe that's doing us the favor, that's allowing us to have our space on this planet in order to live and to hopefully thrive and survive. And if we don't live in tune with the way the universe operates, then we're in trouble. And the wild places remaining on the planet are our portals to the wilderness that rules the universe. And we need those places in order for our common home to remain healthy enough for us to thrive and survive. So this is about protecting special places, but it's also about being consistent with the rules that guide the functioning of the creation and the universe in which we are embedded. So we need these places for our own survival, but we're threatening ourselves. We're exceeding the Earth's capacity to support us. A prime example of that these days is that scientists are telling us that we're entering the sixth mass extinction in the history of the planet. What is a mass extinction? Well, their definition is that it's when 75% of the world's species get lost in a geologically short amount of time. It's an amount of time that's a lot longer than any time we'll spend on the Earth. But think about mass extinctions, you think about the dinosaurs who once ruled the planet and no longer do. We're not to the point where 75% of the species have been eliminated, but the current extinction rates are well above the background rates prevailing between the 5 previous mass extinctions. And the scientists tell us that this is the direction that we seem to be heading into. So that they may come when on the endangered and threatened species list is Homo sapiens, if we're not careful about how we go about living on this planet. And we also all know what the biggest, though not the only, just sheer habitat reduction is the other, I think, but that the climate crisis is probably the biggest reason for that. I'm not going to go into the details. You can read them here for yourself. But of course, just this week, we got news from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at the United Nations about how dire our situation is becoming. And so addressing these crises, which are a threat to our own existence, the result of us fouling our own nest, is a core part of what this land protection is about, because as you'll see as I move on, it makes a significant contribution to the efforts to address climate change and the mass extinction crisis. So how did we get ourselves into this dilemma? And this picture kind of represents that here in the Midwest. We're pretty familiar with this. If you ever fly across the country, you see this grid system that is laid out. Our county roads follow these lines. There's the township governments that we have are based on the grid system, and this was created back in by the Land Ordinance of 1785, which came into place actually a few years before the United States Constitution. And the U.S. started surveying the land and dividing it up so that it could be sold off. This is how the U.S. government financed itself for most of its early history, was selling off these places so that they could be developed. And we did a pretty thorough job of it. To use Illinois as an example, we have 1/100th of a single percent of the original prairie in Illinois that remains. They're fighting over a little piece of it outside of the airport in Rockford, Illinois, right now. And these lands were not ours to sell, actually. They belong to the Native American tribes who resided here before anybody came over from Europe. Those people were removed, pushed on, killed off, replaced by settlers in the South, replaced by slaves. And the wildlife habitat has really been decimated. So it's kind of a sad story in many ways. And it's this process that has led us to the dilemma that we find ourselves in. But there is hope, and that hope is represented kind of by this map. It's a solution that's in plain view. The places of color on this map are the public lands of the United States and the tribal lands still existing within the boundaries of the United States. These are the places where Mother Nature is most likely in significant sizes to remain in its wild or near wild and natural state. These are the places that we rely upon in order to keep ourselves connected to the way the universe operates, and protecting and preserving and growing these places is kind of one of the keys to our future health and survival on this planet. And of course, that is what it is that we're talking about doing here this evening. And The primary vehicle that, if everything goes as we like, that we would use in order to gain these protections is the Wilderness Act, passed in 1965 by the United States. So a couple words about that. Why was the Wilderness Act created? It was to assure that the expanding settlement and growing mechanization does not modify all areas within the US. So it was to address that central cause that I just talked about, and to restrain the expansion and the exploitation of the landscape. What is a wilderness area? It's a place in contrast with those areas where man and his works dominate the landscape, where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man is a visitor who doesn't remain. It's federal land managed to preserve its natural conditions. How do we manage these places in order to assure that the land is not dominated by people and the community of life remains untrammeled? Well, there's no commercial enterprise in a wilderness area. There are no permanent roads. There are no temporary roads. There's no motor vehicles. You don't land airplanes. There's no mechanical transport. There's no structures or installations in those places, and they're managed to stay that way. So this is one of the primary tools that we have available to us and central to the idea of gaining protections for the Red Rock lands in Utah. And Indiana has, of course, some of its own wilderness areas in the national forest down in the southern part of the state. So what I want to do next, and this may get us into one of the tricky technical aspects of our Zoom here this evening, but I want to show our 15-minute award-winning video, which shows you the landscape, gives you a historic background to what we're doing and the threats, and how things are proceeding.
Oh
and
boy.
So we'll watch this and then come back for the rest of the PowerPoint.
No, I'm good. I'm not going to need my brace much longer.
Somebody needs to mute, I think.
You walk through pinyon juniper forest at the rim of a canyon, and it's a friendly place once you get over the stunning space and silence and the mountains that are out there on the horizon at 100 miles away. And then all of a sudden you do start to see life. You see lizards skittering off under a rock. You hear a flock of pinyon jays collecting nuts out of those pinyon groves. And a raven flies by, and then with a little luck, a canyon wren, the glissade of a canyon wren's call, the sort of theme song of the canyon country, a musical waterfall that brings you up short, and you just stop and listen. The sculptural forms of slick rock, just the texture, the light, the combination of stone and sky and twisted juniper with an occasional river running through, it's just a landscape that speaks to me.
Wilderness helps people remember their humanity and their sense of who they are, a planet that they're floating on in the middle of the universe under the stars. I think the ability to hear yourself in the wilderness is something special that you don't get anywhere else, where if it's not your own thoughts, your own breathing, it's the environment around you. There's a strong sense of stewardship that I feel a lot of Latinx people have about our environment, whether they're in the urban environment or whether they spend time in public lands. It's something that unites all of us.
The wildland wilderness is very important to the Navajo people because it represents who they are, their way of life, their education, and their language, and their direct connection to sacred sites, the canyons, the valleys, the mountains. That's all a part of their religion. When they say Ina, that's what embodies the entire wilderness concept. There are lots and lots of animals, deers, bears, snakes, spiders. They are the brothers and sisters of mankind. And we speak for them. And in a lot of ways, they take care of the land, Mother Earth, every day.
I keep saying the word extraordinary because it's hard to describe this landscape if you haven't seen it, but there's nothing else like it on planet Earth.
Utah's ground zero for the fight around public lands and what does it mean to have public lands and what does that mean for our communities and our nation. We're lucky in Utah that we have huge landscapes that we can go in and find solitude. Our public lands here in Utah, if you're from New York City, they're yours. If you're from Boston, they're yours. If you're from Los Angeles, they're yours. If you're from Nephi, Utah, they're yours. And that's the great thing about wilderness and the great thing about public lands.
Utah has been a battleground over the last 35 years, mostly because the politicians that represent this state fail to actually represent the views of the people that live here, and their views are more akin to the oil and gas industry and the mining companies that make heavy contributions to their campaigns. This land is constantly under threat, and without united citizen action, it will be lost.
Some of the most serious threats for land proposed as wilderness right now are oil and gas leasing, mining, off-road vehicle usage, basically any human impact that has the potential to destroy the ecosystem. Fossil fuel development on Utah's wilderness lands also damages our planetary health by accelerating the devastating impacts of climate change. Elected officials in the state of Utah are also seeking to limit the lands available for wilderness designation by claiming that thousands of unused dirt tracks and jeep trails are actually state highways under an obscure law known as RS 2477 from the 1860s. The state of Utah is trying to seize public lands in Utah from the American people, demanding that America's public lands be turned over to state ownership and control. These short-sighted policies place short-term profits over our long-term responsibility to protect our most cherished places, the last places we should sacrifice.
Their main objective is energy development, and I think it goes further than that. Most of our county commissioners are states' rights activists, and they are in favor of removing any federal government control, and they want the state and the county to control all the policies and all the laws pertaining to mineral extraction.
In addition to facing so many threats from climate change, we're also a region that's contributing to climate change because a lot of public lands are being set aside for energy development. If we want to think about climate change seriously, I think it also pushes us to rethink how we manage public lands and think about how we can protect more places rather than prioritize them for fossil fuel extraction.
Coming home from Iraq It took me a couple years to find my way outside. And when I found my way outside and onto our public lands, things started to click for me in a way that they hadn't before, both from a sense of healing as well as recognizing what, at least nominally, I fought for.
There's got to be some places where they're left alone, be freed from industrial energy development. And Bears Ears region is one of the last remaining pristine wilderness area that must be protected.
In order to protect these lands, citizens of Utah formulated America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. This legislation, which is currently before Congress, would protect over 9 million acres of public land in Utah. It would protect the wildlife, water, and air. It would also preserve the remains of Native American cultures that have been here for thousands of years. America's Red Rock Wilderness Act would prevent oil and gas drilling, mining, and off-road vehicles from causing irreparable damage to these lands. It would also ensure that these public lands remain in public ownership, available for all of us to hike, camp, hunt, fish, or simply spend time with family and friends in wild nature.
The public lands in Utah aren't just Utahns' public lands. They belong to everyone. They belong to all Americans.
In the last 30 years, Utah politicians have time and time again tried to pass legislation through Congress that would open these lands to development. And time again, citizens from Utah banded together with Americans across the country to stop them. And so the important thing is that you have to have a mass movement with people across the country to build the political strength to stand up to the politicians of Utah.
I think first and foremost, everybody needs to know that these are their lands, and whatever happens to them, they should always have a stake in what it is. Doesn't make a difference where you live or where you come from. These are public lands. They belong to the citizens of the United States.
Citizen action is crucial to the future of Utah's public lands, partly because, unfortunately, our Utah delegation has not stepped up to their responsibility to protect this land.
Decision makers respond to public pressure, and we have to show up. No matter who the person is that we've elected to office, we have to show up and tell them what we think. So it's up to us to educate them. I encourage everyone I talk to write letters to the editor. Elected officials read those, they pay attention to them, they keep track of how many support one position and how many support another.
The young generation is bringing in these new ideas of how we think about wild places and showing that we need these for our spiritual sustenance and that we love these wild places. And there's kind of this stereotype that public lands are like the old white gray hairs go. And so I think it's powerful to bring in these diverse voices, and I think that's where the real leadership will lie, because it not only shows how many people value these spaces, but also brings in new ways of thinking about how we can protect them in the long term.
Young people can make a difference in the future of Utah's wildlands because the voice that young people give to wild places in Utah, the agency that they give to wild places by speaking for them, is really what's going to lead to protective designations in unprotected wild spaces in Utah.
Having a restaurant here on the edge of wilderness, I'm in contact every year with thousands of people who have just come out of public lands. And what I hear again and again from them is that wilderness fixes something in them. They long for it, they need it, and then to have the experience of being in it and not to be surrounded by other people, they get to fix something in their hearts. And so it's incredibly important that everyone, all of us who care about wild places, that we get involved, that we speak up for what we love.
We just came out of the canyon, and it reminded me of what they say in Mexico when a baby's born, dar la luz, to give to the light. And that's what it felt like coming out of that slot. I came into the light.
It is very important for people from all walks of life to come together and stand up and say enough is enough. This is our home. And if we don't say no, if we don't speak up, we're going to destroy our home. We are so, so lucky to live on this earth, Mother Earth. We have the beautiful landscapes, the sky, the sunlight, and we have young children, many, many generations to come. And we cannot afford to just stand by and allow people to destroy our environment. That's the reason why we should all stand together. There is no distinction of nationality. We're all the children of Mother Earth, and we must protect her.
Okay, can everybody see?
Yes,
Is that black box up on top?
yes, a little bit.
Hopefully it will go away shortly. I think that it will. If it doesn't, let's see here. How about now?
There, it's gone.
All right, very good. So for the last part of the program here this evening, I'm going to talk about 4 areas of solutions. America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, wilderness study areas, BLM wilderness study areas, solutions to climate change, and solutions provided to us by tribes in the area. So there we go. So the first thing I want to cover is America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, which is, has already been stated, is the legislation that's before Congress that if it passed, we would in one fell swoop get everything that we're trying to get. If you find somebody who's ever gotten everything they wanted all at once, please let me know. I want to meet them. That has not been the way this has worked out, despite maybe our best intentions beginning about 30 years ago. But you can look at this map and you can see where we're at. I'm a little colorblind, but these areas that I think are like a burnt orangish color are the lands that are currently inside America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. These are all Bureau of Land Management lands. These have been subject to the Citizens Inventory, which has since then been confirmed 90% by Bureau of Land Management inventories. It's about 8.5 million acres of land divided into a little over 60 distinct units, generally divided by dirt roads or larger spaces. As you can see, the kind of sea green colors here are the places where we've already gotten protections, wilderness designations put in place. You also see down in the central southern part of the state where Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is, established in 1996 by President Clinton. And then to the right of that is Bears Ears National Monument, which President Obama designated, President Trump tried to withdraw, and President Biden has put back in place. So these are the areas that we've gained protection. This legislation defines the turf of the debate over wilderness lands in Utah. It literally defines the turf, and it figuratively defines it because the politics all revolve around this particular piece of legislation. We have in the current Congress 18 co-sponsors of this bill in the Senate and 88 in the House of Representatives. It's harder these days getting these co-sponsors lined up. A co-sponsor in Congress is a person who steps up before there's any vote and identifies themselves as being in support of something. And so they're a crucial organizing vehicle, both around the country, because it helps us engage people in the effort. Also in United States Congress, because if there's a piece of legislation that can advance protections for a portion of the landscape, these are the people we go to in order to make that happen. If there is legislation that gets introduced generally by the Utah delegation that would do harm, these are the people we go to fight that off. We've passed 3 pieces of legislation over the years, and we've defeated a dozen. So we've made steady progress. These co-sponsors are absolutely essential to that effort. And so, as I said before, in Indiana, our pickings are a little slimmer than they once were, but we do have Representative Carson, who's a co-sponsor, Representative Mervan, who remains somewhat in play. And I want to pause here now to give folks the second opportunity to say that you can help out in a couple of ways. And the first way, I'm hoping if you could put in the chat your name and say yes, hopefully, or tell me more to the question, you know, would you be willing to participate in a conversation with your member of Congress or your staff or their staff person, particularly if you're in one of these 2 congressional districts? If you could put your name in the chat, and we'll be copying that down so that I can get back in touch with folks in the coming days, and we can talk about what steps we can actually take to do this and put this in place. That would be very helpful. If you want to know more before you say yes, then write "tell me more" with your name in the chat, and that way I'll know that I got to get back in touch and you got questions. So that's one thing. Another thing is that if you know of another group, most especially within the boundaries of these congressional districts, but anywhere in the state that might be interested in having a program such as this, where you can provide a contact to help facilitate that, please put in the chat, yes, I know a group, and put your name by that. And I'll be following up with you about that. So the other thing, solution that I wanted to highlight here this evening, we've actually got many more than I am highlighting that we're working on, but this is the second big one I wanted to call attention to, and that is wilderness study areas. This is a designation that the Bureau of Land Management can provide for lands that it identifies that have wilderness character. It provides long-term protection for that wilderness character. This is something that the Bureau of Land Management stopped doing under President Bush. They kept inventorying to see what had wilderness character, but then they didn't do anything to protect it. And so we are in conversations currently with the Biden administration, with the Bureau of Land Management and the Interior Department to try and persuade them to reverse that old Bush policy and begin resuming the process that it takes to establish wilderness study areas. So this is something that's important for Utah, but it's also important all across the West. And you can see here on the map the places that we know currently are eligible. There's certainly more for wilderness study area status, where the process could begin. It takes some time for public input and so forth to establish wilderness study areas. There's over 30 million acres of land out west that could meet this criteria. It is potentially the largest single piece that the Biden administration could do to achieve its goal of protecting 30% of America's lands and waters by the year 2030, which would, if attained, would more than double the amount of land with permanent protections inside the United States. So there may come a time when it's possible from Indiana to help us in the effort to persuade the administration to do this. And if that time arrives, if and when it arrives, I will be in touch. But I also want to talk about the role all of this plays in climate change. We all know about, I just mentioned earlier, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's reports and what they say needs to be done to save us from the ravages of climate change. And wilderness designations play an important role in keeping it in the ground, the carbon fuels in the ground, in three significant ways. The first one is literally keeping them in the ground, the coal, oil, and gas. There's a pretty fair amount of carbon fuels under the Red Rock lands in southern Utah. There's a lot of coal. There is enough oil in the ground, and then I'm talking beyond America's Red Rock Wilderness Act at this point, in oil shale and tar sands to equate to what is under the ground in Saudi Arabia. We have just regular oil, we have gas. If we passed America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, we could attain nearly 6% of the carbon budget that the Paris Climate Accords call for to keep the temperature rise below 1.5%, meaning that we would save that amount that could be put towards that carbon budget. So that's pretty significant, actually. There's another way in which protecting these lands helps, and that's by the carbon that is stored in the ground currently, in the shrubs and the trees and the soil, and in these desert areas, even in the rock and what is called caliche. If these areas remain undisturbed, then that carbon remains in the ground and the plants that grow on the ground. If we disturb these places, it begins to release the carbon. So just the simple protection of them is another way in which wilderness protections help us address climate change. And then sequestration is the third way, because all of the plants and the soils, and indeed even the rock, though it's a much slower process, continues to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And as you can see here, that the scientists tell us that worldwide, through these kind of natural solutions, that there's over a third of the carbon that needs to be kept out of the atmosphere to avoid the 2-degree temperature rise can come from these sorts of mechanisms. 8% of that from semi-desert areas such as the Colorado Plateau. So forests, wetlands are the most productive in this regard, but desert lands provide an important contribution as well. And the amount of carbon sequestered would grow by 10% in America's Red Rock Wilderness lands by the end of the century if they remain undisturbed. Also helps address the mass extinction crisis in two important ways. The first is by providing wildlife corridors. The lands in America's Red Rock Wilderness Act are central pieces to 5 wildlife corridors in the Intermountain region. You can see them here. Wildlife will need to migrate further north, higher up, in order to adapt and to adjust and to survive in the face of climate change. So sustaining these corridors is essential for that to happen. The lands in southern Utah, the terrain is highly variable. You have plateaus and mountains up to over 10,000 feet, going down to flatlands and valleys down to 4,000 feet, and it goes up and down, up and down. I like to say that southern Utah is like if you took the Grand Canyon and spread it out all over the southern half of the state. That's what you'd have. That's why we call it the Red Rock Canyon lands. All of that variability in terrain creates what's called climate refugia, which are places where species can hide out and survive and buy time so that they can adapt to climate change. And so this is a second way of addressing the mass extinction crisis. And then lastly, the last solution I want to talk about here this evening is the solution that's been provided by the Native American tribes in the region. This is the founding moment of the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition back in 2015. Underneath the Bears Ears buttes there's another couple hundred people on the other side of this picture that you can't see. These 5 tribes came together to promote the Bears Ears National Monument. The monument proposal was put together by Dahnebekea, which is a Native American nonprofit organization. At the time that this proposal was done, by interviewing the tribal elders in the region to identify the places that remain sacred to the tribe, so that this is a cultural landscape as well as a natural landscape. Hundreds and hundreds of interviews. Mark Maraboy played a central role in the conducting of those interviews, and that's why I said that if anyone is a father of this, it's probably Mark. And so that role has been crucial. These are the tribes that were in the area prior to European settlement. First settlers were Spanish. These lands were part of Mexico until the United States took half of the land of Mexico for the southwest part of what's now the United States. All of these folks still have tribal lands inside the state of Utah, except for the Shoshone. For the Ute and the Navajo, the lands are pretty substantial. The picture on the left represents the ancestral Puebloans who now reside in New Mexico and Arizona. But in the southeastern part of the state, they were once, there are many of these folks who lived there. And if you get into the backcountry out there, you will come across these places everywhere in the backcountry. It's a truly kind of spectacular experience if you get off the beaten path and walk a little bit. So these are the ancestral homelands of these folks, and these folks remain here stewarding this landscape, and it remains vital to them as well. And so this history of this protection effort has also begun to bring an element of justice to the region. San Juan County, where Bears Ears is located, the county government a few years back lost its 3rd Voting Rights Act case, and the federal court ordered a redrawing of the 3 commission districts in San Juan County. Native Americans represent a little over half the population of San Juan County, but never held a majority. Mark was the only person on the county commission to ever represent the Native American community until the boundaries were redrawn. And now the person on the right, Willie Gray Eyes, who when he was elected here a couple of years ago was chair of the board of the Dahnebekea. The person immediately to his left is Kenneth Maraboy, Mark's brother. And they now form a majority on the San Juan County Commission in San Juan County. And I believe this is the only county, certainly the only county government in Utah, I believe the only one in the United States to ever have a Native American majority on it. They have their work cut out for them. It'd be nice to have ambulance service in the regions inhabited by Native Americans, the rural areas. Be nice to have schools, swimming pools that often, all these sorts of things that weren't very much previously available. They got a lot of work to do, but they've also completely reversed the position of San Juan County on the Bears Ears National Monument proposal. And then another part of this effort from tribes is that recently, last fall, the Navajo Nation Tribal Council voted to endorse America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, primarily because of the impacts that they're seeing on the reservation due to climate change and the potential for the land protection to help address those concerns. So this is a very important development in the history of the land protection development effort, and we're very grateful for it. So over the years that we've been working on this, it's going on 40 years now, we have designated nearly 1 million acres of wilderness from the original boundaries of the citizens' proposal. There's 2.5 million acres of wilderness study areas that were established before President Bush put a halt to that process. And in addition to that, there's another 1 million acres beyond the WSAs within Grand Staircase and Bears Ears that have gained a level of permanent protection. So we're basically halfway there, meaning we have halfway to go to attain what we're striving to do with the original Citizens Inventory embodied in America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. And this is how we go about doing this. It really is the citizen power that enables us to get this work done. Just a handful of representations of that here, showing up for slideshows, contacting Congress, talking to congressional staff, reaching out to the agencies during comment periods, week after week, month after month, year after year. That's what gets this done. And that's why your role, your potential role is important. And we do all of this so that these places will still be there for these kids and their kids' kids. The tradition is, you plan for the 7th generation, and that's what we're trying to do here. But we do this not only for us, but because these places have their own intrinsic value. Even if no human ever sets eye or foot on them, they deserve to be protected just for what they are. So that's it. That's the program. I'm going to keep this up for just a second because it's got my email address and that text message ARRWA to 52886 that I talked about at the beginning, and Sua's website. You can write it down. We'll probably send it to you after the fact. But I'm going to get out of this here now, so maybe I can actually see people. So looky there. Friendly faces. Any questions? Any comments anybody has? As I like to say, I even take arguments. I see there's lots of things in the chat. Thank you. I don't know if there's questions that are in the chat that have been there. You're welcome. Thank you. Amanda, is there any questions in the chat that I should be talking about?
I'm looking right now. I haven't seen any questions, mostly just people commenting and saying they're willing to help.
That's wonderful. I like that. Save the chat and send it to me.
Absolutely.
Any questions? Anybody got anything they want to say?
Hi, this is George. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to thank you for all of the encouragement and support that you've always given me through the years. I've been going to Utah vacationing with Phyllis for many years while we were teaching, and we would go camping and hiking. And so we fell in love with the place, and when I retired, got in touch with Clayton when I knew of the idea that Sierra Club was supporting this Red Rock Wilderness Act, and they were looking for people to go to Washington, D.C., and Clayton sponsored me and encouraged me and has been in my corner all along. So he knows that he's got a strong ally in Northwest Indiana, and I hope that that also extends throughout our state. So thanks for all that you've done throughout the years, Clayton, and fantastic presentation with that, especially that video. I remember seeing that or one like it years ago, and it brought me to tears how, you know, special it is and how also delicate it is and endangered. So it hurts me every time I watch a show on television and they bring on four-wheel drive vehicles driving off road, just tearing up the place. It's in danger, and we need to do things to protect that wilderness area because we need it. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I appreciate all that you said, and I think you're the one who's been in my corner, but anyway, I really appreciate it, and of course, other people here have helped out greatly as well too. So it's much appreciated, and I know you guys. Utah is not the only thing on your plate, and a lot of hard work that is going on, and it's really much appreciated, very much appreciated. Thank you. Others? Literally no questions?
I actually have a question.
Cool.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but as I was watching the video and, you know, I was very moved by it too, seeing the Indigenous voices showing up. Has there been any talk about potentially a land back campaign and giving some of that land back to those Native peoples?
So the answer is sort of yes. The tribes by and large have not expressed interest in that, with one exception, which is that the Utes, there's 2 Ute reservations, tribes that are part of the Bears Ears Coalition. And so what's commonly referred to as the Northern Utes, they believe that with some grounding, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't make, you know, any clear statement, but they believe that there are lands that are due them by treaty, that are currently managed by the Bureau of Land Management, that historically had been part of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. And so they have initiated court proceedings to try and regain title to those lands. And they felt that that the effort of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act might prejudice their proceedings. So they asked us to remove those lands from the legislation, and we have done that. If I still had the PowerPoint, I could go back to the map and show you where that is, up in the Book Cliffs region. And they're fully aware that in the meantime, we're going to try and gain and sustain whatever protections that we can get. But if they won in court, it would be their land, and America's Red Rock Wilderness Act would not apply anyway. So that was the decision that the Utah Wilderness Coalition made. So that is one example of how that has kind of come into play here. Another way that's really important not literally a land back thing, but the Bears Ears Monument designation, when President Obama put it in place, had provisions in it for co-management. In fact, it authorized an intertribal commission to advise the government on how to manage the landscape from a tribal perspective. There was not legal authority to create a literal co-management under the Antiquities Act. It would take an act of Congress to do that. But that was put in place when President Trump rescinded President Obama's proclamation and eliminated or sought to eliminate 85% of the protections. He also got rid of that commission. President Biden has put the commission back in place, and so they're kind of restarting, and that would become an important element of the management of the landscape and both the natural and the cultural landscape, and Bears Ears as well. So that's another form of land back. It's a sharing of responsibility, which, you know, honestly, except in cases like with the Utes where there's like, you know, I mean, the U.S. Constitution says treaties, that's the law of the land. It's like a treaty with, well, I was going to say Russia, but maybe we shouldn't talk about Russia here tonight. You know, it's a treaty with a sovereign nation, and that's the law of the land. And so if there's a treaty for that landscape, I mean, I'll just say one other thing about this, and then I'm going to shut up because we don't have all night. But the Supreme Court ruled in a case here just a few years ago that had to do with criminal statutes in the state of Oklahoma, and people were wondering what this might mean out there. That they basically said that by all legal standards, about half of Oklahoma should still be tribal land, including the city of Tulsa. You know, what do we do with that? I mean, seriously.
Yeah, that's why I asked. Thank you for clarifying some of that, because I know that, you know, there's a lot of land out there that, or at least I know out west, you know, there's a lot of land that, you know, according to treaties, should still belong to some of these sovereign nations and don't. So that's why I was curious, you know, if any tribes had tried to do that. So thank you. Yeah, I'd love to look more into that.
So I think there's a hand up here. Marilyn and Greg.
Yeah, I think my question might be related. I was wondering, in looking at the map, it looked like there were carve outs or, you know, areas between a lot of different areas that were not protected or not included in the.
Oh yeah.
Is that related?
It's not all contiguous because not all the land is eligible for wilderness. So only those places that meet the characteristics of being wild are in the proposal. So you're talking about, oh my gosh, I'm going to say something and I'm not sure I'm right. About a third of the public lands in the state of Utah that remain eligible for wilderness protection. Utah has the third most public lands percentage-wise of any state in the country after Nevada and Alaska. It's about 60% of the state is United States public land. So it would be a tithe. If we designated all of this land as wilderness, it would be roughly 10% of the state.
Are there any, I guess, proposals for at least providing for more of a contiguous approach longer term?
Well, you would have to rewild the landscape in order to bring it into a condition where it would be eligible. The public lands, you know, they're not all in condition to be eligible for wilderness. You've got oil and gas drilling, you've got mineral extraction, you've got places that have been over recreated on that have caused damage. You've You've got, logging that has occurred, mining that has occurred over the years. And they're just simply not wild enough to be eligible for the protection. So you would have to rewild that. Part of the connectivity also exists with the national parks. A lot of these places are surrounding the national park, so it creates a larger, set of core areas when connected to the national parks. If you add the protection through wilderness designations or something similar like national monument designations to help out in that regard too. Most of the boundaries in the units are really just dirt roads. But as you observed on the map, particularly in the West Desert, it's far more fragmented, both in terms of ownership patterns, where there's more private land intermixed into the public lands, and then also with the impacts. Does that get at your question?
It does, but I can see why. Well, you'd want to try and prevent further development in those areas.
Yes.
For maintaining at least some sense of continuity for the wildlife.
Well, that's absolutely, the connectivity for wildlife is absolutely crucial. And I mean, there are corridors, as were illustrated in the one map, that extend beyond those areas that get formal protection. And so you want to maintain as much of the natural character of those places as you can. And I mean, honestly, if we're ever, 30 by 30 is supposed to be a step towards the direction of getting 50% of the land area in the United States protected by the year 2050. We can get 30% based on public lands and private lands that are still in good health around the country. We can get to 30%, but if we're gonna, and we can get beyond 30%, but if we're gonna get to 50%, we begin talking about rewilding. And these are the kinds of places, where I said earlier, this is where these are the strongholds of nature and the places that in the long run that we can grow from. And so, I mean, that's a long-term vision, and that's more ambitious than what America's Red Rock Wilderness Act is. And we're still fighting off ongoing threats to these places as it is too. So,
well, with all the slant drilling technology, I guess I'm wondering, do those borders really, the wilderness borders prevent, drilling into the wilderness area?
Theoretically, you can drill underneath a designation, but you have a whole management process that you have to go through. Our legal staff is kept busy dealing with oil and gas leasing and drilling, though we, under President Trump, despite all their efforts, we were able to block it all. Not a single well drilled. Not a single well drilled. So
I don't know how to raise my hand, so I'm sorry about that. The midterms are going to be really, really important because there's a lot of people that want to get rid of the federal lands, and or there's that potential if the Republicans get a majority in the House and the Senate. There's always that, right? And so it's really important to get the right people in and get the things done eventually, because heaven knows there's a lot of pressure to do stupid things also.
there is, it has not always been this way. We used to, in Illinois, have a strong bipartisan support for this legislation. We had a senator, Senator Fitzgerald, two senators, Republican senators, Fitzgerald and Kirk, who were co-sponsors. We used to have 4 House co-sponsors. Those folks are all gone. The last time I talked to Senator Kirk about this, before Senator Duckworth replaced him, he said he could no longer co-sponsor because of the pressure he was getting from the Utah delegation. This is somebody who got an award from the Utah Wilderness Coalition for his hard work on behalf of the landscape. The Republican platform, the last time they had one, Trump, last time he ran, they didn't even have a platform. But the last time they had one, it called for the return of the federal public, not the return, they never had it. It called for the giving of the federal public lands to the states. Of course, not every Republican complies with that. But what used to be, conservation used to be a bipartisan thing. And like so much these days, it's a lot harder to come by. There's not a single Republican co-sponsor of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act today. We once had as many as 18. So,
Yeah, it's been chilling, at the least.
There is another question in the chat from Deb. If I wanted to go visit, is there some volunteer work I could do while there?
Jesse, I'm gonna let you answer that question. Unmute, Jesse. The lower left.
Yeah,
there you
yeah.
go.
Yes, there's that. In fact, I think you can actually go to Sue's website and see the volunteer opportunities for land restoration and for various activities out there. And that's what we were talking about just before the program. Is I'm planning on getting out there and doing that. This summer. Yeah, I'm right after this call, I'm going to be looking at the Suez site and seeing what I can fit on my schedule so I can get out there.
So the answer is yes. I'll give a plug for Sierra Club outings too. They're not stewardship outings like the SUA ones are. But it was a Sierra Club outing that got me involved in this back in 1995. And it was an activist outing. They don't do those too much anymore. But when I went, I was a community organizer in Chicago at that time. And so when I went on an activist outing, I knew what they were doing to me. They were setting the bait and they were reeling me in. Just like I'm doing with y'all now. But yeah, so I give a plug to the Sierra Club outings as well. Other questions? Maybe we're done. Maybe we've gone on long enough anyway. Thank you all very, very much. I really appreciate it. Like I said earlier, everything you do for this and everything else you do, everybody's going above and beyond the call. Second Congressional District, check. Well, good luck with that one. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank
seeing
you so much, Clayton. Thank you everyone for coming.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
for organizing this.
Yes. Nice seeing you, George.
Good seeing
For
you too.
sure.
Bye.
All right, bye everyone.
Night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.